front of meter, a lot of the services are being overhauled here as they are in a lot of other countries. But yeah, I mean, do you think the direction of travel that we've seen so far is A, positive, and B, moving fast enough?
Well, the potential need, and you get back to fundamentals, like there is going to be a huge need for flexibility in the UK. And although perhaps some of the implementation of things like the capacity market derating have been sort of problematic from the immediate point of view of deploying storage projects, they have been very positive in encouraging the direction of travel towards longer duration storage.
Sure.
And longer duration storage is ultimately where you're going to see more of that value. You can do the same sort of services like frequency regulation with a longer duration battery with less wear, but also have a lot more flexibility. It's a Swiss Army knife when you have several hours of duration and you're able to do transmission and distribution services. You can provide capacity. You can do these fast response services, and even move beyond that to things like inertial type response from batteries.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, the conversations this year and last year has been a lot around the revenue stacking kind of principle. And I think, I hope I'm right in saying that a couple of years ago it was something that wasn't really on the table, I guess, for a lot of people. Now, I guess for the benefit of maybe people that weren't able to come to the show or are kind of getting newly into this sector, can you maybe just explain that? And I think you referred to it just now in your kind of description of the versatility of energy storage. But yeah, so what does the revenue stack really mean for you guys at the moment?
So it depends when and where it's going to be valued. We've seen a lot of the systems in GB over the last year or two emerge as quite actually short duration, short life systems, usually built around just one service or two. So frequency regulation and nominally capacity, but actually if you've got a 24/7 frequency regulation contract, the capacity is a sort of freebie. You don't have to do anything extra for it. So it is really a single service. Where you see stacking make more sense is where you actually have to do things at different times, and the direction of travel for National Grid on this is to moving towards sort of more controlled products with sort of gated windows, which means that you can provide one service during one time of the day and move on to provide another service at the other time. But again, that's only possible if you have the sort of right architecture, and as a technology provider, it's something we think a lot about, how to make sure that the software that you have is able to accommodate scheduling of different services at different times, is able to take on like the experience of all previous projects that have been done.
Yeah, and I mean that's not just in presumably the day-to-day kind of operation of the plant or the execution of the market strategies, but also has a massive bearing on the lifetime of the asset itself, the way you manage the battery charge and discharge versus cycle life and degradation.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people, I think, get very hung up on the idea of degradation, and that means that batteries cannot be long life assets. Of course, there are ways of managing that, and whether that's you overbuild your system or that you augment the system with adding batteries in over time, there are ways of countering that and making sure that you get the performance you need for as long as you need it. And that could be 10, 15, 20 years, potentially even longer. But it really depends on how the technology is put together and what kind of thought is put into that. If you try and just add new battery modules to an existing facility without having thought about how that's done, you get new with old, and the state of health is very difficult to control. You get a lot of problems with that sort of system. It's something we've again thought a lot about from the early projects that we did, from 10 years of actually owning and operating these things as coming from a background of AES, and now as we've branched out into being just a technology provider, we take all of that experience and put it into any project that we do for a developer, utility, or behind the meter customer.
Right, yeah, and in the provision of technology at the moment, you guys have got essentially 3 different kind of grid scale storage products, I guess. So the 2 that people might be more familiar with already would be C-Storage from Siemens, part of the JV that created Fluence, and the other part being the Advancium platform that AES has been deploying over the years. And now to add to that, we've seen that Fluence has introduced its own dedicated product, Sunflex, which to my knowledge is one of the first kind of mass market grid scale products aimed specifically at a kind of solar plus storage application. Could you maybe just talk us through a little bit of the thinking behind that, and sort of how close to being a reality that is here and in other markets, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So you're exactly right. The C-Storage platform and the Advancium platform have both come from a long track record and being early pioneers in the storage space, and so they're pretty well known for both utility scale and behind the meter applications. But we're always looking at where the market is going. We're trying to stay ahead of trends, and one of the directions of travel that's quite clear and compelling is essentially solar firming. Like, people want solar at night because that's when typically peak demand is. They want more flexible delivery of solar rather than it just arriving when it's there, and to smooth out any intermittency because of clouds or other things passing over. And so Sunflex as an energy storage platform has been designed with that specifically in mind. It's one of the only systems that's thinking about deploying with DC coupling instead of AC. So it's actually behind the solar inverters at a solar farm. It would be distributed around the solar farm. Yeah. And aside from there being a synergy then of not having to buy two separate sets of inverters, one for the solar, one for the battery, it also actually means you can get a much higher yield out of those solar panels. Because if you have, say, a 100 megawatt interconnection for a solar farm, you typically would be putting a little bit more than that. But a lot of the energy would get clipped from the solar panels because you will only get that peak output a certain time of the year. Yeah. What having energy storage and Sunflex as a platform behind the inverter on the DC side lets you do is increase that ratio significantly. So you could actually have 200 megawatts of solar with 100 megawatts interconnection and clip none of that energy. You'd be able to use it all usefully. And so we're seeing that really be valuable in certain markets where there's a clear incentive and reward for delivering solar during either certain hours or a preferential tariff. So that we're starting to roll that out initially in the US because we see that as one of the attractive markets, places like the Caribbean and the Americas. And as we gain momentum with that, we'll roll it out in other places as well.
Sure. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, there are markets where dispatchable solar is already, economically it works, and the kind of regulatory programs are in place to let that happen. So I think Australia is probably, I might be wrong, but Australia is probably a pretty good example. Hawaii, lots of the rest of the states, like you say. Kind of how the dynamic play out between those kind of more enabled and potentially solar-rich kind of markets to sort of others. Thinking maybe the UK or Germany or what have you, where the kind of solar business case has been a little bit eroded over the last few years. Yeah. Do you think Sunflex is an immediate proposition for those markets as well, or is that going to be a little bit more question of until the cost curves sort of come to meet in the way they have in those early markets?
So whenever we're looking at projects for clients, be they utility developer or other, we try and have a good understanding of where the fundamental business case is going to be, and whereas the proposition is going to be quite strong in certain markets where you have an incentive to specifically deploy storage to be dispatchable during certain periods or an uplifted tariff. We don't see that immediately with a sort of a pure arbitrage play of using the solar and dispatching it just at a higher price period. There's not quite enough volatility in sort of some of the less solar irradiant markets or ones that don't have those specific incentives. So we'll continue to monitor that, and we're willing to work and collaborate with people who think they see a different opportunity there. But we expect mostly it to be in the Americas initially, and we'll assess other markets as they come. Europe.
But I mean, you still have the other two platforms for those other applications.
Exactly.
As well, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the DC thing is quite unique actually. Like Sunflex is one of the very few platforms that has this ability, and Fluence is, I think, the only one that will be able to deliver this at scale in different markets. Yeah. The AC coupled systems are far more common. We have two very proven platforms in that space, and they serve a very wide suite of applications as well. Anything from the really complex microgrids and critical power, all the way up to these very large scale, long duration systems like the 100 megawatt 4-hour battery that we're deploying in California at the moment for peaking purposes. It's a full spectrum between those.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think you blogged for us recently on a project in Ireland looking at really sub millisecond.
Yeah,
So it was the provision of digital inertia, as you referred to it, with energy storage, kind of playing a role that thermal plants have traditionally played. load.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you've got the much longer duration as well. So
yeah, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, because if you have a long duration system, you can still provide those very fast, very responsive services as well. But what we were trying to get at there is, we've been the cutting edge of a lot of this technologically for since the beginning of really the storage industry as we know it today. And traditionally there's a lot of market opening that happens with frequency regulation. There is clear recognition that because batteries and other sort of fast responding storage technologies are able to respond quickly, you need to rely less on procured conventional generation to provide those services. What we were trying to prove, beyond that, and we've done with sort of independent analysis from Queen's University Belfast, and a report that's open book, people can look at it from Everose, was to look at this really fast response capability. And we demonstrated with a project that we deployed for Kilroot Power Station, 10 megawatts in Northern Ireland, that the battery can actually respond in hundreds of milliseconds rather than under 1 second or 10 seconds, which is more traditionally the timeline. And the reason that's really interesting is one of the next barriers beyond frequency regulation is actually inertial challenges. You traditionally would need spinning masses, just conventional generators, to be providing inertia. And what that study actually was showing is that the speed of response you can get out of a battery, you can be providing the equivalent service far more efficiently with a digital response. So it's not a real spinning mass, but because it responds so quickly before the frequency has even hit its nadir, it's helping reduce rate of change of frequency. And that's actually one of the big barriers to deploying much higher levels of renewables, much higher penetrations.
Sure, and I mean, that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's another powerful way in which decarbonisation can be assisted.
Absolutely, both directly and indirectly. So one of the findings of this study was actually that with 360 megawatts of energy storage, you would be able to provide the equivalent inertial recovery of about 3 gigawatts of CCGTs. So it's almost a factor of 10 more efficient to use storage for that purpose than it is the CCGTs. And then you get the side benefit of, essentially not blocking off a certain amount of your demand to be provided from conventional generation, and that frees it up to be provided from renewables or other sources.
And I think in a country with about 5 million people, I think as a relatively small landmass as Ireland has, presumably developing 3 gigawatts of CCGT is going to be trickier than deploying 360 megawatts of batteries.
Well, exactly, but it's more about, I think, the retirements of those existing generation. We're seeing a lot of aging power plants in the Irish system that are reaching the end of life, and as those begin to close, the sort of security of supply position needs to be carefully managed. And I think what we've been able to show is through technological innovations, you're able to do that far more cost effectively and efficiently with essentially new flexible technologies like battery energy storage.
It's, I believe, the first big show presence from Fluence in the UK. And yeah, I mean, we're talking about Siemens being one of the biggest engineering companies in the world, and AES being both historically and in terms of scale one of the bigger players in energy storage. So where's the need for creating a JV in Fluence, and what's the thinking behind that?
So the idea behind Fluence was to recognize that there is a very large market all the way from the sort of CNI scale projects up to the utility scale, and to be able to deliver that on a global basis. So Fluence was established really bringing together two of the biggest players in energy storage under one house, and to form a separate standalone company in order to be able to better serve that market. We're able to deploy energy storage in 160 different countries around the world through the Siemens channel. We're bringing together the sort of most experienced team of people and the widest deployed energy storage platforms under one roof, to really make sure that on each project that we work with our clients, that we're delivering them in the most effective way, and using our scale, experience and credibility to make sure that the projects work for them and do exactly what they want them to do.